Welcome to the Good for America podcast. I'm your host, former Congressman Bob Good, former chairman of the House Freedom Caucus. I want to remind you to subscribe to the podcast, rate the show, refer it to your friends, and follow me on social media at Rep Bob Good. The title of this podcast is The State of Virginia Politics. But before that, I do want to give a few comments on the shutdown fight, the so-called shutdown fight that's happening in Washington. The White House must not miss this opportunity to execute the layoffs they've promised to execute, to reduce government, to cut spending, to use the opportunity that's presented with this so-called government shutdown. Again, it's a so-called government shutdown because it's just a temporary pause in non-essential government operations. Most Americans wouldn't even know there was a shutdown if they weren't watching the media or listening to politicians. But President Trump and his budget director, Russ Vought, have said they're going to utilize this to reduce the federal workforce, to reduce spending, and to take advantage of this opportunity to do what they'd like to do, and Democrats will not cooperate in doing when the government is open. So they cannot overpromise and underdeliver here. They've talked about very modest numbers. The number that I've seen is 16,000 they think they might lay off. Well, there's 3 million federal workers, not counting the military, 3 million, and 16,000 would be about 0.5%, meaning you'd be keeping 99.5% of all federal workers. And by the way, I'll remind you that 80% of federal workers were not even coming to work in person 4 years after COVID, when President Trump was sworn in back on January 20. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here. So Republicans need to deliver on this. They can't make deals with the Democrats during this shutdown. They cannot consider rescinding the very modest, very reasonable cuts in Medicare, Medicaid, and welfare that were part of the big bill. They can't consider extending the Obamacare subsidies that are set to expire at the end of the year. Republicans have to reject the notion of free, subsidized health care. That is not an appropriate role of the federal government. Obamacare is something that people would not buy on their own with their own money. It only exists because of the subsidies where 90% of it is paid for by the American taxpayer. Republicans need to let that expire. Republicans need to use this shutdown opportunity to break the Democrats. The Democrats are addicted to government. And Republicans have to stop perpetuating Democrat budgets, Democrat policies, Democrat spending levels by doing these CRs. Republicans need to take advantage of the opportunity to pass their 12 spending bills between now and November 20, when the funding of the government would expire once the Senate passes the House CR. Republicans have to return to the party of fiscal responsibility. They've got to give voters something to vote for them for in the midterms next year, besides $40 trillion in debt, which is what they're on track for. Republicans have to courageously stand for more than the managed decline of the country. And when you're perpetuating or extending the Democrat spending levels, policies, and budgets, which is what the CR is that the House passed, then you are simply managing the decline and not making it worse as quickly as Democrats would. That is not enough to run on. Let's show some courage, some principle, and make a difference for the American people between now and the end of the year with the funding of the government. Now back to our main topic, which is Virginia politics and the November 4 election, the state of Virginia politics. I moved to Virginia with my family 51 years ago at the age of 9 in 1974. We moved down from North Jersey, where my parents were from. And I've lived in Virginia for about 47 of the last 51 years. My family and I had brief excursions, 3 years in Georgia, 1 in Delaware, back in the late 90s and early 2000s. But I've lived most of those 47 years in Virginia in the greater Lynchburg area, or what's known as Central Virginia, Lynchburg, a little bit of time in Roanoke, a little bit of time currently in Farmville, Virginia. And since moving to Virginia, in, again, 1974, I've followed and been involved either more indirectly or directly with Virginia politics for most of that time, followed, advocated, engaged, supported conservative candidates and causes. I can remember my first sort of foray unofficially into politics was in the 1976 presidential campaign. I can remember as a kid at my elementary school in Lynchburg, T.C. Miller Elementary School, campaigning in my school for Gerald Ford over Jimmy Carter. It certainly felt like most of my school was for Jimmy Carter. This was when I was in the 6th grade in the fall of 1976. That's the first time I remember being involved in political debate, political discourse, advocating for a candidate. And I can remember as a kid, just as an 11-year-old kid, how much it hurt for Gerald Ford to lose. I knew that politics mattered way back then as a kid. I knew that the issues mattered. And the adults whom I respected, my parents and others, were supported Gerald Ford, so I supported him as well to the extent that 11-year-olds can do that. And I would also submit, by the way, that 1976 was the last time that there wasn't much of a ideological difference between the two candidates or nominees. Jimmy Carter was not the most liberal, certainly not by today's standards, of Democrat nominees, and Gerald Ford was no conservative. And that's probably part of why he lost, in addition to his connection to Richard Nixon and the whole Watergate thing, was he didn't give voters a real reason to vote for him as a nominee. So Carter was probably not a whole lot worse than Ford. And Carter's victory, ironically, is what ushered in Ronald Reagan as the country reacted to Jimmy Carter's failed, incompetent presidency with giving us the Reagan Revolution in 1980, 4 years later. There's perhaps a lesson to learn from that in Virginia politics as we continue this discussion. But who knows? What if Ford had won? That was a very close election, Carter and Ford. And Ford got, I think it was over 240 electoral votes, very close election. If Ford had won, he would have been ineligible, not eligible to run in 1980 because he had served more than 2 years of Richard Nixon's term. But who would have been the presidential nominee for Republicans in 1980 if Ford had won? It may well not have been Ronald Reagan. There wouldn't have been the reaction to Jimmy Carter that ushered in the conservative revolution under Reagan. Perhaps we would have had Bob Dole in 1980 as our nominee and potential president. But I didn't formally become involved in politics, despite that the advocacy and the following and the debating and the supporting, that sort of thing, informally. I didn't formally get involved in politics until almost 40 years later after that election, when I ran for county supervisor, the Board of Supervisors in Campbell County, just outside Lynchburg in 2015. But I have to say, it's very sad to see what's happened in the Old Dominion, in Virginia, politically in the last couple of decades. Virginia has, and I'll brag on my what I consider to be my home state, brag on my home state a little bit here. Virginia has unrivaled historic significance in the founding of our country, in the history of the United States. Jamestown was the first American colony established back in 1607 down near the coast of Virginia. It preceded the famous Plymouth Rock in Massachusetts by 13 years. Again, Jamestown in 1607, Plymouth Rock in 1620, 13 years later. Virginia was the largest and most influential state during the Revolutionary period among the colonies. Virginia, again, the largest, most populated state and the most influential state. Of course, Virginia gave us 4 of our first 5 U.S. presidents. George Washington, the first president, the third president, Thomas Jefferson, followed by James Madison and James Monroe. So 4 of the first 5 were from Virginia. Virginia gave us other tremendous historic figures among our founders, like Patrick Henry, Virginia's first governor, George Mason, who was critically important in the Bill of Rights, John Marshall, who was gone to be Chief Justice as well as serve in the cabinet and serve in the House of Representatives, Richard Henry Lee, who was tremendously influential in the Declaration of Independence, Edmund Randolph, who was the first Attorney General under George Washington, the second Secretary of State, and many more. Again, Virginia is unrivaled in its contribution to our nation's founding from a historic figure standpoint. And beyond those first 4 presidents that were among the first 5 from Virginia, Virginia has given us more presidents than any other state. Virginia has provided a total of 8 presidents among our 47 U.S. presidents. In addition to Washington, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, William Henry Harrison, John Tyler, Zachary Taylor, and Woodrow Wilson all come from Virginia. So Virginia's list of presidents is most impressive not only in the quality, but also the quantity of presidents have come from Virginia. No other state even comes close, I would submit. Incidentally, 4 states, just 4 states of our 50, have provided more than half of our U.S. presidents. So 4 states have contributed 24 of our 47 presidents. That would be, again, Virginia with 8, Ohio right behind with 7, New York with 5, and Massachusetts with 4. If you're keeping score, again, Virginia 8 presidents, Ohio 7, New York 5, and Massachusetts 4. You add those up together, and that's 24, just over half of our 47 presidents coming from from 4 states. 30 states among our 50 have not provided any presidents, and these are by birth, by the way, where the president was born. So 20 of our states have given us all 47 presidents. 30 of our states have never had someone born there who went on to become elected presidents. Continue to talk about Virginia. Virginia's House of Burgesses was the first elected representative body in what would become the United States in the colonies. Virginia's Constitution had significant influence on the U.S. Constitution. From a historic site standpoint, Virginia has Jamestown, as we mentioned, Williamsburg, Colonial Williamsburg, Yorktown, where we won the great victory to win the Revolutionary War, Mount Vernon, the birthplace of George Washington, Monticello, the birthplace of Thomas Jefferson, Montpelier, James Madison's home, Appomattox, where our country united after the Civil War, and of course, Arlington National Cemetery and more. And until Barack Obama in 2008, Virginia was among the most Republican states in the country in terms of voting for Republicans in presidential elections. Again, until 2008 with Barack Obama, Virginia was one of the most Republican states in the country in terms of electing Republicans. Virginia had, until 2008 with Barack Obama, Virginia had not voted for a Democrat candidate for president since LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson, in 1964. And that was likely a result of just sympathy towards JFK and that assassination. And Virginia voted Republican in every presidential election from 1952 through 2004, so 13 out of 14 with the exception of that 1964 race for LBJ. But things changed in 2008 when Barack Obama won, and Virginia has voted blue in every presidential race since that time, from 2008 through the most recent one in 2024 last year. And until 2021, Virginia voted blue or Democrat in every statewide race, every governor's race, lieutenant governor, attorney general race, after 2009 until the change in 2021 that elected the Governor Youngkin at the top of the Republican ticket. Virginia is unique in that we get to have elections every year. We get to have, or we have to have, again, Virginia has elections every year. We're the only state in the country that has elections every year, as Virginia does. I would submit that we should change our state elections to match the federal elections, to coincide with the federal elections like they've done in most states across the country. That would prevent these perpetual candidates who are always in search of a race, who run every year, because if you hold a statewide seat, you can run, those races are in odd years, you can run in an even year without risking your statewide seat, or vice versa. You can have a member of Congress run for governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general without risking their congressional seat. I don't think that ought to be permitted. I don't think that's in the best interest of the citizens to have these perpetual candidates in search of a race who can run every year risk-free. It would also conserve resources if you didn't have to spend money every year on elections. It would relieve the burden on the activists, the people who actually do the work to win in elections, and reduce election fatigue. You know, when you turn around right after an election and you start the next election. Virginia ought to also require party registration. We have open primaries where Democrats can vote in Republican elections. That happened in my election last year. My primary last year, where thousands of Democrats came out and voted for my opponent. In Virginia's open primaries, we know of thousands of Democrats who did that. Virginia also, if you're going to have open primaries, that just makes no sense when you don't have party-run primaries anymore. The law changed in Virginia that requires open primaries and we don't have party registration. You can't have party-run primaries anymore, like conventions or mass meetings or those sorts of things. We're also battling in Virginia to prevent ranked choice voting, by the way. Think of Alaska, how that is ranked choice voting has helped to elect Democrats statewide in Alaska. Ranked choice voting is designed to prevent conservatives from winning. It's a tool of moderate establishment Republicans and Democrats. But Virginia is also unique in that governors cannot serve consecutive terms. It's the only state in the country where a governor cannot be elected to consecutive terms. A governor can serve more than one term, but they have to have a term in between, at least 4 years in between, before they can run again. Historically, Virginia, the gubernatorial race goes to whichever party lost the presidential race. So in other words, since Republicans won the 2024 presidential election, then Virginia would typically go the opposite direction historically and elect a Democrat this year. That's been most recent years, again, goes the opposite of the presidential race and the gubernatorial race. Whichever party wins the White House loses the next year's governor's race based on recent history. I hope that is not true in Virginia, but all eyes are on Virginia again this year, and New Jersey. New Jersey has those off-year gubernatorial races also. But November 4 will tell us about how short the memories of Virginians are, or Virginian voters in particular. Did we suffer enough under full Democrat control of government in Virginia from 2020 to 2021? We had the most radical leftist governor in Ralph Northam, who was elected in 2017, and then Democrats took control of the General Assembly in 2019. So they had full control of government in Virginia for 2 years in 2020 and 21, and they took us radically left. Did Virginians suffer enough like the rest of the country with full Democrat control of the federal government? After Joe Biden won in 2020 and Democrats got control of the House and the Senate, we all suffered under full control of Democrat control of government for 2 years in 21 and 22. Both of those brought a reaction. So again, Democrats controlling all of government from 20 to 21, and then we elected the first Republican statewide slate in 21. Democrats controlling all of Washington, all of the federal government in the first 2 years of the Biden administration, and then you saw a reaction to that with Republicans getting the House in the 22 midterms and having divided government as a result. So do Virginians want to go back to the radical, harmful policies under which they suffered at the state and the federal level when Democrats had full control? Do we want more of that pain and suffering? Or have Virginians learned any kind of a lesson? We're going to find out in the Virginia elections on November 4, 4 weeks from now. There was, and there, again, I mentioned the reaction that Virginians had to full control of government by Democrats in the state here in Virginia after Ralph Northam won in 2017, and then the Democrats won the control of the General Assembly or the state legislature in 2019. The Democrats went so radical on everything that swept in Republicans in 2021 with Glenn Youngkin winning as governor, Winsome Sears as lieutenant governor, Jason Miyares as attorney general. That was a reaction to those extreme Democrat policies. You had massive turnout in the red areas in the 2021 election 4 years ago, particularly in the Republican congressional districts of the 5th District, the 6th District, and the 9th District. And this despite a candidate at the top of the ticket, Glenn Youngkin, who was not particularly strong on Trump or on guns. He infamously, was not an NRA member. He was not particularly strong on the life issue. He said he didn't want to talk about it until after the election, that it wouldn't help him win. So despite issues that were particularly important to most red area voters, most rural voters in the 5th, 6th, and 9th districts, issues about support for Trump, the Second Amendment, and life, we had tremendous turnout and tremendous numbers in Governor Youngkin's favor in that 2021 election. I would submit, as a result of how bad Democrats were with full control of the federal government, full control of the state government. Republicans then 2 years later in 2023 lost the House of Delegates back. They ran on a 20-week abortion ban, or so-called abortion ban, in 2023, and they lost the House of Delegates. Governor Youngkin infamously said he would like a 15-week abortion ban, which means that 95% of abortions are permitted, about 5% are prohibited. But he would take a 20-week abortion ban, which meant that 99% of abortions were permitted, but 1% were prohibited. And what happened is Democrats ran ads saying that Governor Youngkin and Republicans wanted to ban abortion just because they believed in some restrictions. And Republicans did win most of the competitive House of Delegate and state Senate races, but they narrowly lost overall in 2023. And incidentally, the most liberal Republican state Senate candidate lost a competitive race, and the most conservative Republican state Senate candidate won a competitive race on the issue of abortion, both of them. So again, did Virginians suffer enough under Ralph Northam and Joe Biden? Are they willing to elect radical Democrats on November 4 weeks from now? Abigail Spanberger, who leads the ticket, has a 6-year voting record in Congress. And she is anything but a moderate. She's anything but bipartisan. As a matter of fact, her voting record in 6 years in Washington is 99% with Joe Biden. It's 99% with AOC, Maxine Waters, Nancy Pelosi, Hakeem Jeffries, whoever you think of as the most extreme radical Democrats. I challenge anyone to demonstrate a difference in Abigail Spanberger's voting record in Washington and AOC, Maxine Waters, Nancy Pelosi, Hakeem Jeffries. No difference. She was all in on Biden's border invasion. She supported the open border policies. She was all in on the reckless, massive deficit spending that's given us so much inflation and so much debt, record levels of debt. She was all in on the Democrat extreme COVID policies, the mask mandates, the vaccine mandates, the censorship, the suppression of views, the closing of schools, the keeping the schools closed. She voted for the H.R. 1, the Democrat bill to allow cheating in federal elections all across the country. She voted for H.R. 2, the PRO Act, which would have stripped away Virginia and every other state's right to work policies and forced unions on every state in the country. She voted for that, again, H.R. 2. She voted for climate extremism. She supports tying Virginia's energy policies to California's, electric vehicle mandates, wind and solar subsidies, utilities being able to pass on the cost of unaffordable, unreliable energy development, again, wind and solar, onto rate holders or consumers who in their electric bills. Spanberger also taught at the Islamic Saudi Academy from 2002 to 2003 in Virginia. It was nicknamed Terror High, the Islamic Saudi Academy. You need to look that up. Spanberger taught there for 2 years. And the question is, on November 4, 4 weeks from now, will Virginians buy Spanberger's phony, moderate, bipartisan claims, which are, of course, helped by the mainstream media? But there's nothing moderate or bipartisan about Abigail Spanberger's voting record. It doesn't matter what she says or what she's saying today. What matters is what she did during her 6 years in Congress. What about the lieutenant governor race? Frankly, the controversial lieutenant governor race. There is a potential problem for conservative Christians and the Republican nominee, John Reed. John Reed is the first practicing homosexual who's been nominated for statewide office in Virginia. I think it's sad that Republicans have achieved this precedent, this milestone. John Reed won the nomination by default. There were 3 or 4 intended candidates. One dropped out for health reasons. One failed to achieve the 10,000 signatures required to be on the ballot. So John Reed became the only candidate and won by default. No Virginia voter yet has voted. No Republican has voted for John Reed. And irrespective of your views on the moral issue connected to John Reed, It is a math problem for the Republican Party. Reversing that for a moment, or going back in some history, establishment Republicans, the Republican Party establishment, has a long history of not supporting conservative nominees for statewide office, meaning when conservatives have won Republican nominations, the party itself, the party establishment, as mainstream Republicans, if you want to call them that, have not supported conservative nominees like Oliver North, Mike Ferris, Ken Cuccinelli, E.W. Jackson, Corey Stewart, and so forth. And of course, they lost their statewide races as the Republican nominee. It seems that many establishment Republicans would rather lose than elect conservatives. And I will tell you that last fall, when John Reed first began to run, many conservatives expressed concerns and an unwillingness to support John Reed if he were to become the nominee. Of course, everyone assumed there would be a contest, there would be other candidates, we'd have a choice. But those concerns about John Reed were ignored when they were expressed to his supporters when he was first beginning his race, or perhaps those concerns were underestimated. And again, everyone expected there'd be a choice, there'd be a contest, and that John Reed wouldn't win by default. You have to wonder how compelling it must have been what Glenn Youngkin saw a few months ago when he called on John Reed to drop out of the race. It must have been very compelling, concerning, convincing, whatever it was that he saw, the social media posts that he saw, because he didn't call for John Reed to withdraw out of principle or he had moral concerns about John Reed, but he called on John Reed to withdraw because he said he can't win. It's going to take down the ticket, and he needs to pull out based on what Glenn Youngkin saw. John Reed then posted a defense video defending himself that was really offensive to many. He acknowledged, pornography, gay pornography. He acknowledged promiscuity and affairs and so forth. I thought that video really hurt him with Christian conservatives or those who might have an issue with his chosen lifestyle. But for Republicans, I would just ask once again, for Republicans generally, specifically in Virginia, is anything sacred? Is anything non-negotiable anymore in terms of a nominee or who we will support or who we will vote for? Does anything disqualify a candidate from being an acceptable nominee? Or is it enough just to be not a Democrat? In other words, Republicans will vote for anyone who's not a Democrat. What if Republicans were to nominate an abortion provider, not just a pro-choice Republican, but someone who actually performed abortions? Would Republicans vote for that person? What if Republicans nominate a transgender person? That's happened other places around the country, which, by the way, is the predicted evolution of the LGBT agenda, is the transgender agenda. The T, the LGBT, the T is a natural evolution of the LGBT agenda. You've heard some folks say, hey, we're not supposed to judge others. We are supposed to judge candidates and elected officials. We are supposed to judge candidates and elected officials. So what will conservative evangelical Christians do, other conservatives, other people of faith in this election? It'll be interesting to see with this lieutenant governor race. What will pastors and faith leaders do? What would they tell their congregations to do? Will they join mainstream Republicans in crossing this bridge with no problem with Republicans crossing this bridge and nominating someone to head their ticket who's an openly homosexual lifestyle? It's incredible. It's been incredible for me to personally to watch many of my conservative friends twist themselves into rationalized pretzels defending their support of John Reed. You have to wonder what they will achieve or receive in return for this compromise. And I fear the party may well suffer a painful lesson with this nomination. Turning to the Attorney General race, Jason Miyares and the now infamous Jay Jones, you see with the recent revelation of these very troubling texts from Jay Jones to another member of the Virginia House of Delegates, a Republican, in fact. And these texts by Jay Jones, the Democrat nominee for Attorney General, are the latest illustration or demonstration of the mindset of radical left Democrats. And they're willingness to consider violence, to support violence, to fail to condemn violence towards political opponents. The Democrat Party, the radical left, increasingly embraces violence against political opponents. And you see that with the text by their Attorney General nominee in Virginia, Jay Jones. He texted to another Virginia House of Delegate member, a Republican, apparently accidentally at first, but then once he realized he was texting her, kept on texting, saying, forgive my language, but that he would like to piss on the graves of Republicans. He also expressed a desire to assassinate a Republican leader. He talked about putting 2 bullets in the head of then Republican Speaker of the House, Todd Gilbert, that if he had a choice between Hitler, Pol Pot, and Todd Gilbert with only 2 bullets, he'd shoot Todd Gilbert twice. He expressed a desire for harm for Republicans' children, specifically Todd Gilbert and his wife's children. And this, he has not been condemned by Spanberger or the Democrat lieutenant governor candidate or any Democrat elected official in calling him to withdraw from the race. I think Miyares is positioned to win this race. I always believed he was going to win. He's been a competent, capable attorney general. He's the incumbent. He's got a money advantage, which is very rare in politics for Republicans to have more money. Certainly in Virginia politics is very rare. I think most Virginians want law and order, pro-police policies, tough on crime stances. They don't want cashless bail, refusal to prosecute violent criminals. They don't want defunded police. They don't want violent offenders to be released from prison or jail. They don't want pro-criminal policies or Soros-funded prosecutors like Jay Jones would be likened to or he would associate with. I'm not sure if he's gotten money from Soros specifically. So I think Jason Miyares is going to win this attorney general's race. The Democrat nominee, Jay Jones, also was guilty apparently of driving 116 miles an hour on a Virginia highway a couple of years ago. So I think he's a disaster of a candidate. I think Virginians at least will win the attorney general race. What about the House of Delegates? The lower house, the 100 seats in the House of Delegates in Virginia. Like Congress, there's very few competitive seats or districts. There's not very many that are really competitive. There's maybe 20 seats or so, and Republicans won a majority of the competitive races when they lost the House of Delegates in the last election. But there's not many that are competitive. But Republicans need to give voters a reason to vote for them. Republicans need to be bold, courageous, and principled, and to stand up for conservative Republican policies. Republicans shouldn't fear the abortion issue, which is not determinative for most swing voters, meaning the people who vote to have more abortions, that's the driving issue for them, are going to vote Democrat anyway. Republicans are right on virtually every issue. Voters are with Republicans on most issues. And abortion is a life and death issue that should transcend politics. It should be worth fighting for. It should be about more than just winning elections. Democrats are going to run ads accusing Republicans of banning abortion if Republicans believe in any restrictions. If they don't believe in abortion up to the moment of birth at any time for any reason, funded by your tax dollars, which is the Democrat position. Republicans need to go on offense on the abortion issue and expose Democrats for how extreme they are and stop acting like they don't want to talk about abortion. Republicans might as well be principled and unapologetic. That earns trust and respect from voters. Republicans, may not be the answer to most of our problems politically. They are not. But Democrats are the cause of most of our problems politically. And unfortunately, by default, Republicans are our only hope from a political party standpoint when Democrats are the only other option. But Republicans have to inspire, motivate, give voters a reason to vote for them. And it can't be just that they're not Democrats or they're not as bad as Democrats. Give a reason for voters to vote Republican to keep the Republic. That is our mission. That is our challenge, to keep the Republic. So thank you for watching this episode of the Good for America podcast. Thank you for listening in. I want to remind you to subscribe to the podcast, rate the show, refer it to your friends, and follow me on social media at Rep Bob Good. Let's keep the republic.